Behind the high stone walls and iron gates of Blackwood Manor, life seemed flawless. Richard Dexter was a man who possessed everything: immense wealth, a spotless reputation in high society, and a calculated, ice-cold charm that manipulated everyone he met. To the world, he was a generous philanthropist, but to those who looked closely into his piercing, unblinking eyes, he was a master of control. A man who believed that with enough money, you could make any problem and any person vanish without a single trace. It was a freezing, rainy night in October when 22-year-old high society journalist Elena Vance arrived at Dexter's luxury estate for an exclusive interview. She was young, ambitious, and closer to uncovering a dark financial scandal than she realized. Elena was seen entering the grand foyer, carrying a small leather notebook. She was never seen alive again. The next morning, her worried family contacted the police, launching one of the most agonizing investigations in modern history. When lead detective Marcus Vance knocked on the heavy oak doors of Blackwood Manor, Richard Dexter welcomed him with a polite, completely calm smile. He didn't flinch. He sat in his leather armchair, calmly sipping a glass of vintage scotch, and offered a flawless, rock-solid alibi. Security cameras showed Elena leaving the property through the back gate at midnight. The footage seemed undeniable, a clear silhouette of a woman walking away into the dark, rainy night. But Detective Vance felt a cold chill in his spine. As he looked around the pristine, silent mansion, he noticed something strange. The expensive Persian rug in the main hallway was damp, smelling faintly of harsh chemical bleach. The trap was set, starting a psychological war between a brilliant detective who refused to back down and a wealthy psychopath who believed he had just committed the perfect murder. The interrogation room at the city precinct was cold, sterile, and smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Richard Dexter walked in not like a suspect, but like a man who owned the building. He wore a perfectly pressed charcoal suit, his posture rigid, his confidence bordering on arrogance. Across from him sat Detective Marcus Vance, a man who had spent 20 years reading the dark secrets hidden behind human eyes. Vance didn't start with accusations. Instead, he pulled out a file and laid it on the metal table, slowly revealing a series of photos taken at Blackwood Manor. "Mr. Dexter," Vance began, his voice low and raspy, "your security footage is a masterpiece. The lighting, the timing, the way the figure walks. It's almost too perfect." Dexter leaned back, a faint, condescending smirk playing on his lips. "I believe in security, detective. It's what one does when they have something worth protecting." But Vance pushed harder. He began to dissect the timeline, pointing out the impossible gap between Elena's arrival and her supposed exit. He recounted the witness reports of a black sedan seen speeding away from the manor's side road at 2 a.m., hours after the supposed exit on the tape. Dexter's composure didn't break, but his fingers, resting on the table, stopped their rhythmic tapping. The detective then moved to the most chilling part, the bleach. He described in vivid detail the microscopic evidence found on the hallway rug, trace amounts of organic material that didn't belong in a pristine mansion. He talked about the chemical scrub, as if he had been there in the room when it happened. "You see, Richard," Vance leaned forward, his face inches from the suspects. "The problem with perfect murders is that they are planned by a mind that assumes everyone else is stupid, but a house has a memory. Those floors, those walls, They hold on to things that bleach cannot reach. You didn't just clean a carpet. You were trying to erase a moment in time. As the hours dragged on, the dynamic in the room shifted. The air grew heavy. Dexter's rehearsed answers became shorter. His eyes, usually calm and predatory, flickered with the first sign of genuine agitation. He wasn't just being questioned, he was being unmade. Every layer of his high society persona was being peeled back to reveal the hollow, cold emptiness beneath. Dexter realized that this detective wasn't interested in his money or his influence. He was interested in the truth. And for the first time in his life, Richard Dexter felt the crushing weight of being cornered. He remained silent, but the silence was no longer a sign of control. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality beginning to collapse. While Richard Dexter remained trapped in the suffocating silence of the interrogation room, refusing to utter another word without his team of elite lawyers present, the real battle was unfolding miles away under the relentless, freezing autumn rain. Detective Marcus Vance knew that time was his greatest enemy. In high-profile cases involving powerful, influential men, the window of opportunity is brutally small. Once Dexter's lawyers secured his release on bail, any remaining evidence would disappear into thin air. Guided by a silent hunch and a series of cryptic financial records found in Elena's apartment, Vance dispatched a specialized forensic search team to the dense, untouched wilderness surrounding the far northern boundary of Blackwood Manor. The woods were suffocatingly dark, ancient, and flooded with cold mud. For hours, officers moved in a slow, methodical line through the heavy fog, their powerful flashlights cutting through the thick canopy of trees. It seemed like a hopeless endeavor until a young officer's boot struck something solid buried beneath a thick layer of damp, decomposing leaves. It was a heavy, rusted iron hatch bolted into the muddy ground and half hidden by overgrown roots. The hatch belonged to an abandoned, forgotten drainage system built beneath the estate decades ago. As the team forced the heavy iron door open, the sharp, overwhelming stench of industrial chemicals and decay filled the cold night air. Vance descended the slippery stone ladder into the pitch-black subterranean tunnel, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beam of his flashlight danced across damp concrete walls until it landed on something that made every officer present freeze in place. Lying on the muddy stone floor was a crushed, waterlogged leather handbag, soaked in rain and grease. Beside it lay a broken cassette recorder, the very device Elena had used to record her interviews. But the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. A few feet deeper into the tunnel, partially submerged in a pool of dark, chemical-laced water, sat a heavy plastic storage drum, sealed tight with heavy industrial tape. The seals were fresh. When the forensic team carefully cut through the thick plastic, they found what Dexter was so desperate to hide: bloody clothing, Elena's missing winter coat, and a pair of discarded leather gloves soaked in the same chemical bleach found on the mansion's rug. Richard Dexter hadn't just committed a crime. He had built an underground execution chamber beneath his own home. The illusion of his perfection was officially shattered, leaving behind a terrifying trail of evidence that was about to drag the untouchable millionaire straight into a nightmare he could never buy his way out of. The discovery of the subterranean chamber beneath Blackwood Manor should have ended the case on the spot. But when dealing with men who operate at the absolute highest levels of wealth and power, the law rarely moves in a straight line. Within 1 hour of the forensic team surfacing from the drainage shaft, a fleet of luxury black sedans pulled up outside the police precinct. Out stepped Arthur Pendleton, the most expensive, ruthless defense attorney in the country, accompanied by a team of junior lawyers and private security consultants. Pendleton didn't come to negotiate. He came to destroy the prosecution's case before it could even reach a judge. Inside the interrogation room, the entire atmosphere violently shifted. Richard Dexter's posture immediately relaxed, the cold, arrogant smirk returning to his face as his legal team took over the room. Pendleton launched a brutal, calculated counteroffensive. He systematically attacked every single piece of evidence gathered by Detective Vance. He argued that the search warrant was issued under false pretenses, that the property boundaries of Blackwood Manor were miscalculated, and that the underground tunnel was accessible from public land, meaning anyone could have planted the evidence to frame his high-profile client. Even more sinister was the sudden pressure applied to Detective Vance from within his own department. Phone calls from city officials, mysterious warnings from precinct superiors, and sudden threats to pull the funding from the investigation began pouring in. Files began to go missing. Key witnesses suddenly refused to speak to the press, and the chain of custody for the forensic evidence was aggressively questioned. Dexter sat quietly in the center of this storm, sipping bottled water, looking at Vance not as a suspect looks at a cop, but as a predator looks at a minor inconvenience. He made it crystal clear without saying a word. Justice is an illusion, and truth is something that can be bought, sold, and erased if your bank account is large enough. By midnight, despite the bloody clothing and the sealed industrial drum found on his property, Pendleton pulled off the unthinkable. Citing procedural errors and a lack of direct DNA linking Dexter to the items at that exact moment, the judge granted a massive bail. Richard Dexter walked out of the police precinct a free man, stepping into the flashbulbs of waiting reporters with his head held high. But as he entered his limousine, Detective Vance stood in the shadows of the alleyway, watching him leave. The legal system had failed. The money had bought a reprieve. But Vance knew something Dexter had forgotten. A man who believes he is untouchable always makes one final, catastrophic mistake. The hunt was no longer official, it was personal. Out on bail and protected by an army of high-priced attorneys, Richard Dexter believed he had successfully outsmarted the law. To the public, Blackwood Manor was once again a fortress of absolute silence and legal immunity. But true paranoia is a silent disease that slowly rots a man's mind from the inside out. Dexter knew that while he had destroyed the legal hold on his case, the one thing he couldn't erase was the relentless shadow of Detective Marcus Vance. Vance had been officially suspended from the force for defying corporate orders, his badge confiscated, and his desk cleared out. But taking away a man's badge doesn't stop his brain from working. Unbound by protocol and operating completely in the dark, Vance became Dexter's worst nightmare, a rogue detective with nothing left to lose. While Dexter celebrated his release behind closed curtains, sipping expensive whiskey in his high-ceilinged library, Vance spent days conducting unauthorized surveillance from an unmarked vehicle parked deep in the woods bordering the estate. Armed with high-powered night vision lenses and an old military police scanner, Vance watched the manor like a hawk. He knew that sociopaths like Dexter always have one fatal flaw: an overwhelming urge to verify that their secrets remain safe. The pressure was mounting. The national media was suffocating the estate with 24-hour coverage, and rumors were spreading that federal agents were preparing their own independent financial audit into Dexter's offshore accounts. On a foggy Tuesday night at precisely 3 a.m., Dexter finally snapped under the weight of his own arrogance. Believing the local police were completely neutered by his lawyers, he stepped out into the pouring rain alone, carrying a heavy, water-resistant metal briefcase. Vance watched through his telephoto lens as Dexter bypassed his own security sensors and walked toward a secluded, abandoned guest greenhouse at the far edge of the property, a location the original police search team had completely overlooked during the initial raid. Inside the decaying glass greenhouse, surrounded by dead plants and dark shadows, Dexter used a heavy key to unlock a hidden floor safe buried beneath a pile of rotting wooden crates. He opened the briefcase, preparing to extract a set of secondary audio tapes and original financial ledgers that directly linked him to Elena Vance's murder and blackmail scheme. He needed to burn them before federal agents arrived. But as Dexter pulled the damp documents from the dark iron vault, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the hollow glass building. He froze, standing in the doorway, drenched in rain, with a revolver leveled straight at his chest, was Marcus Vance. The untouchable millionaire was caught red-handed with the physical proof of his crime, and for the first time in his cold, calculated life, Richard Dexter was staring into the eyes of a man who couldn't be bought. In that frozen moment inside the ruined glass greenhouse, with the cold barrel of Marcus Vance's revolver pointed at his chest, and the damning evidence lying open beneath his feet, Richard Dexter realized his money was completely worthless. The illusion of his absolute control shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Within minutes, the distant siren wails cut through the howling wind and rain. Vance hadn't operated entirely alone. Before entering the greenhouse, he had sent a secure digital feed of his live surveillance to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, bypassing the corrupt local precinct officials entirely. Dozens of federal tactical units swarmed the grounds of Blackwood Manor, their heavy spotlights illuminating the dark estate, officially bringing the reign of the untouchable millionaire to a sudden, violent end. The trial that followed became one of the most explosive legal spectacles of the century. Arthur Pendleton and his team of high-priced attorneys attempted every legal trick in the book to suppress the cassette tapes and financial ledgers found in the greenhouse safe. But the federal prosecution was bulletproof. The tapes contained horrifying, clear audio recordings of Dexter discussing the destruction of evidence and detailing the financial extortion scheme that drove Elena Vance to his home on that fatal October night. Combined with the chemical traces found on the mansion's Persian rug and the physical evidence recovered from the underground drainage shaft, the jury took less than 2 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Richard Dexter was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and federal conspiracy. As the judge read the sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Dexter stood in his custom charcoal suit, his face completely pale, his arrogant smirk replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. The vast fortune he spent a lifetime building couldn't buy him a single second of freedom. Blackwood Manor was seized by the federal government, its grand halls left empty, dark, and echoing with the ghosts of its bitter past. Today, Marcus Vance lives a quiet, solitary life, far away from the corruption of the city precinct. He cleared his name, but the victory brought little peace. The case of Richard Dexter remains a chilling, permanent reminder that true evil often wears a tailored suit, speaks with refined elegance, and hides behind high iron gates. Money can construct the most elaborate lies, buy silence, and rewrite history for a time. But in the dark, beneath the weight of relentless truth, even the most impenetrable empires inevitably crumble into dust.